Yeah, just give you.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah. So motivation, microservices provide much better decoupling. Therefore, they help to modularize and isolate software modules. See advantages. However, microservices are modules of larger system. Therefore, they must be integrated. This poses a challenge for the architecture. On the one hand, the architecture has to ensure that the microservices can work together to form overall system. On the other hand, the freedom of the microservices should not be too restricted, since this would compromise their isolation and independence, which are required for most of the benefits of microservice architecture. Okay, so what they are trying to say is, I guess the architecture has to ensure that the microservice can work together. This is much like being able to work together, but still they should be able to maintain their isolation. So it's like uh, enough amount of freedom to change or to extend a system or service, and like I guess the same principle that we used to follow about loose coupling, uh, like it should be open for extension and closed for modification, something like that. So it says on the other hand, the freedom of microservices should not be too restricted, since this would compromise their isolation and independence, which are required for most of the benefits of microservice architecture. Definition. For this reason, it is advisable to divide the architecture into micro and macro architecture. Micro architecture comprises all decisions that can be made individually for each microservice. Micro architecture consists of all decisions that can be made at a global level and apply to all microservices. Okay. So let's say if we are talking about any deployment workflows or stuff, does that affect individual microservice?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I could think of, like, definitely, because each microservices that we would deploy individually. But one thing uh, that I could think of is like the whole transactions. Like, say, there is an event occurred which all 3 or 4 microservices collectively should work and get the response back. Then I think at that time we need to think about what is the overall macro architecture. The one good thing is the distributed transaction, right? That is definitely coming into a picture of macro architecture. Like, what if microservice 2 fails? How are we collectively responding back? Are we failing in the mid, or is it responding back to microservice 1? Are we following choreography and all those things? That definitely will come into a macro architecture.
Okay. Uh, yeah. So is this distinction also applicable to orchestration versus choreography, Deva? Or I guess, or shall we call like both, like orchestration and choreography should be part of my macro architecture?
Yeah, definitely. Because we cannot do the choreo, I mean, the distributed transaction with one microservice, because since the problem of multiple microservices that we are solving using this distributed transaction, right? So definitely we need to have more than one microservice should be there to achieve that distributed transaction. So definitely that would come as part of that is one of the concern. But I think we need to just think through if they have any other scenarios
Fair.
which they get given. What are all the things that we need to think about when we think about macro architecture?
Yeah, exactly. So one thing on that line, I used to think about configuration. So do we use any common configuration while deployment workflows are going on, or is it like configuration should always be individualistic?
My thought process is like, I think the configuration should be as a horizontal services. Like it should be there as a separate microservice, or it should be part of a separate service, so that we don't keep individual things inside. But I'm not sure like how the Docker, all these things are kept. But I mean, from the Spring perspective, like we have kind of a Spring Cloud infrastructure. That's where we keep all the properties in the GitHub. So any properties, we can directly change it in that GitHub repository itself. Automatically, there's a webhook involved, and then it will reflect in that particular microservice.
I guess, yeah, I guess that is static kind of configuration, right? So another point was that there is this something called as dynamic configuration, wherein they try to change the modification even when the deployment is already in process, like, or if not, the service is already running, and then we try to push some configuration while the service is already running, something like that. So that is something called as dynamic configuration, where they have some config bus, and through that config bus, they try to deliver the configuration when the service is already up and running. That is one thing which will be affecting a macro architecture, right? So I was just trying to think in terms of decisions, like what decisions could affect at a global level, something like that. And I guess answering to your question about Docker, in terms of Docker, we try to include the config file with the Docker image itself. So either we go Git way or Docker way, both have the static configuration which could be attached with the deployment, right? Which could be attached with the image or the snapshot of buildable code base.
Yeah. So to your point, definitely configuration would definitely come into our macro architecture, right? I think monitoring also should come, consider. More or less when we think of macro architecture, I would say the service mesh that we are talking, right? I think service mesh itself may come into a macro architecture, like all the cross-cutting concerns, right? Logging, monitoring, observability, like, all the things that we are talking, every things would come under macro architecture.
Makes sense. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I guess cross-cutting concerns is the right word then. Yeah. Okay, shall we go ahead? Any other doubts, anyone? Okay. The drawing above illustrates this idea. The overarching macro architecture applies to all microservices, whereas micro architecture deals with individual microservices, so that each microservice has its own micro architecture. Chapter walkthrough. This chapter illustrates the following: the division of domain logic into services, domain-driven design, bounded context are great approaches for such a division. The decisions that are part of technical micro and macro architecture, and how a DevOps model affects these decisions. The question of who divides the decisions into micro and macro architecture and creates the macro architecture. Okay. So I guess the DevOps model might be about configuration, right? Or the deployments, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like all the operation related things involved would come under DevOps, especially the CI/CD and other infrastructure related things. Involved in that.
Makes sense. The e-commerce system discussed in last chapter can be divided into microservices like ordering, registration, product search. Suppose the product search team decides to optimize search with a new algorithm. In this, a micro and macro architecture decision. Is this a micro or macro architecture decision?
Anyone wants to? I would say it's a micro, because it's dealing with only one product search, and that too they are changing the algorithm. Let's say right now maybe we are using algorithm A, now we are moving to algorithm B, which impacts only that microservices. Because of this algorithm change, it's not going to impact ordering or registration.
Makes sense. Yes. Cool. It does not matter if microservices can work with each other. It does matter, right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's what the integration tests are about. The macro architecture consists of all decisions which have to be made at an individual level for each microservice. Yeah, of course, like it should be false, right?
Yeah, the macro architecture need not to be handled at the individual level, right?
Yes. Okay, domain-driven design and bounded context. In this lesson, we will discuss what domain-driven design is and how bounded context fit into that definition. Bounded context and strategic design. Regarding to the domain architecture, the concept of micro and macro architecture has long been a common practice. A macro architecture divides the domain into coarse-grained modules. Okay, so coarse mean broad, right? Like we used to have fine grained, which means limited scope, or it's like specific scope, and then we have coarse grain, right? So coarse grain could be in terms of macro architecture. So that means divides the domain into coarse grain modules. That means it could be a broader scope than compared to micro one.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah.
These modules are further divided as part of microarchitecture. For example, an e-commerce system can be divided into modules and submodules as follows: customer registration, order process, data validation, freight charge calculation, payment, and shipping. The internal architecture of order process module is, however, hidden from the outside and can be altered without affecting other modules. This flexibility to change one module without influencing the other module is one of the main advantages of modular software development. Search, order process, payment, and shipping. An example of a domain architecture. The drawing above shows an example of the division of a system into multiple domain modules. In this division, each module has its own domain model. Let's discuss each. To search successfully, data such as descriptions, images, or prices must be stored for the products. Important customer data can include, for example, the recommendations that can be determined based on past orders. So what point are they trying to make here? The drawing above shows in this division, each module has its own domain model. So, okay. So they are just trying to explain the domain. So I guess the search domain, and they are just describing what the search domain is about.
Yeah. Basically, if we are thinking kind of microservices perspective, how we can split, usually kind of the idea is like we just take the business, like any line of business, right? If it's any financial side, or it's a health domain. So each domain may have a different business. So here they are just e-commerce business that they're saying. So I think basically when we look at it, we need to just look for like what line of business we are in, and then how we can that split that monolithic kind of application to a microservice. In case, if we are migrating the old, or if you're creating a new application, how we can think creating the microservice in that way.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
To process orders in the order process module. Anyone, any doubts? Please interrupt me in case if you have any doubt, okay? To process orders in the order process module, the content of shopping cart have to be tracked. For products, only basic information is required, such as name and price. Similarly, not too much data concerning the customer is necessary. The most important component of the domain model of this module is the shopping cart. It is then turned into an order that has to be handed over and processed by the other bounded context. For payment, the payment associated information like credit card numbers has to be kept for each customer. For shipping, the delivery address is required information about the customer, while the size and the weight are necessary information about the product. So I actually am wondering why they are all here everywhere. They are just talking about information. Does this point towards like we have a dedicated scope or dedicated access control for some information on some service or some module?
So I think the way they split the domain, right? So that the whole point of splitting into domains is mainly keeping the business scenarios in mind, and secondly, each domain can change and evolve on its own.
Okay, makes sense. So, like, are you pointing towards object relational mapping or something, or
It's yeah. This is going there. This is
okay.
like which microservice owns which data kind of thing.
Okay. So because like so domain model like I have seen so far they try to connect the domains or they try to connect some data models to some databases, right, or some tables either. I guess in terms of ORM they try to do the same thing, and that's when I have seen like they try to establish some scope or some access control type of strategies. And the other day in microservices we were having the discussion, right, like each microservice endpoint should be modifying a single table or a single field. It's not that a table is shared with multiple APIs or multiple services. It should not be that, because that might be defeating the purpose of microservice architecture. So since domain and since the information things are being considered here, I guess they are trying to exactly point us or trying to indirectly say something like that, right?
Yeah, I too agree that I mean I'm not sure like how practically it's possible, but that's a written statement. Like I mean, I read that like always each microservices should have their own database, and definitely the communication between the microservices should happen based on the contract. Usually, sometimes in the monolithic, what we do, we kind of go and write a procedures, kind of dealing with a multiple table, and then based on some unique scenario, we may try to get the output to Java side or something like that. We do that, and here they strictly say that we should not connect. I mean, we should not mix up two different tables or anything. So here we need to make sure the domain contexts are, I mean, the boundaries are clearly written so that let's say, one of the order table and user table should not mix and match for some other scenario. So definitely everything should happen from the microservice level. It should not happen anywhere in the back end or something like that.
Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so they are saying this reflects that the module require different domain models. Not only does the data concerning customer and product differ, but so does the entire model and the logic. Okay, so is it like if we are trying to extend some model or if we are trying to extend some functionality, in case if it is shared with something else then that might have some spillover effects, right? Some consistency issues and something like that. So if we maintain this discipline, I guess it should not have any spillover issues while we are trying to extend, which is one of the core principle of microservices, like modularity, I guess, or like keeping it open for extension. Okay. Domain-driven design. Domain-driven design offers a collection of patterns for the domain model of a system. For microservices, the pattern in the area of strategic design are the most interesting. They describe how domain can be subdivided. Here are some books you could look into if you are interested in domain-driven design. Domain-driven design offers many more patterns that, for example, facilitate the model of individual modules. The original DDD book provides a lot more information. It introduces the term domain-driven design and comprehensively describe DDD. The more compact book, Domain-Driven Design Distilled, focuses on design, bounded context, and domain events. The domain-driven design reference is also about the author and original DDD. I guess they are just talking about all these three books or documents. Okay. Oh, interesting. Bounded context. Domain-driven design speaks of bounded context. Each domain model is valid only in bounded context. Consequently, search, order process, payment, and shipping are such bounded context because they each have their own domain models. Multiple bounded contexts. It would be conceivable to implement a domain model that comprises multiple bounded contexts. However, such a model would not be the easiest solution. For example, a price change affects search. Okay, it says it would be conceivable. It should be conceivable to implement a domain model that comprises multiple bounded contexts. However, such a model would not be the easiest solution. For example, a price change affects search. However, it must not result in price change for orders that have already been processed in payment. Okay, yeah. I guess this is one of the important pain point in e-commerce development. So I remember we used to had issues when if there are some ongoing orders in process and due to some reason it's let's say some service changes the price price in databases, then I guess the ongoing orders which are in process also used to change, or the orders which are not confirmed also used to change. And that was a few of the pain points which needed to be dealt with separately, because like we have shared context, we have shared data, shared domains. I feel. It is easier to store only the current price of a product in the bounded context search and to store the price of the product of each order in payment, which can also comprise rebates and other complex logic. Okay, yeah. So I guess even the price at the time of order processing is being concerned, then there could be several other operations that could be implemented, like maybe discounts or maybe some other way to change the price or change the existing order value or something like that. So I guess in that cases, they are pointing towards multiple bounded contexts, and where there could be some logic involved to resolve inconsistency issues. Therefore, the simplest design consists of multiple specialized domain models that are valid only in certain contexts. Each domain model has its own model for business objects such as customers or products. Okay, so is it something like we are subdividing it, right? So if we subdivide in each context or in each domain model, we can apply some way of reading some value or reading some particular type of information.
Yeah, my understanding. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you have done domain-driven design before, so where do I start? So what he's saying is he's talking about a couple of things here. First thing is the bounded context, right? For example, price. He's saying in the context of search, it's a different number. In the context of payment, or actually in the example he's given about in the context of order processing, right? It's a different number. So the actual value that is reflected is applies to that context, right? So because a value can be different in different contexts. So what he's saying is so that there is something, for example, if you have like a customer microservice, right, which is like a pretty which has exhaustive detail of, you know, customer ID, first name, last name, address, blah blah blah, how all the products they purchased before, all the coupons they used, everything. It would be, if you take customer microservice, it would be a pretty exhaustive domain model because it's the owning domain. But you also need customer information. For example, you might show the customer information in another context, right, in another microservices. That model, it just takes only the customer elements that are needed for that microservice. So it will have its own model, the customer model. So that's what he's saying, like each domain model has its own model for business objects such as customers or products.
So you mean to say, like, we have one universal customer model, like domain model, and whichever microservices it is, we will apply some permission, data permissions, or we will apply some context over there, so that
Exactly.
a subset of values could be considered for one microservice and other subset could be considered for other microservice. And since there won't be any overlap, we won't have any consistency issues.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, just to add in, I mean, the context is I mean, I agree with all the things. So here, just to add in here, the model means just the POJOs, right? Like technically when we speak. So when we, here they mean like model means, for example, customer related data. So we may create a customer object. And because now we have like a customer table, right? And then we put all the information, let's say it's an RDBMS scenario, we put all their information in a RDBMS table, and then we create a model or Java object for a customer. But in case, let's say I'm designing a microservice for a product, then at that time, I would focus only on the product. But in case if there is a need for a customer information, then I would create one more small object, but not the exhaustive one, maybe a customer name and then two, three properties. Then so I should have my own model sitting in other microservices in case if there is anything related to customers needed. Is that right?
Yeah, makes sense. I think that makes sense. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think one another use case in this context is in terms of authorization. We have different authorization roles, right? Like not everything is accessible in any service. Like let's say if we have some admin roles or other type of authorization levels, then there I guess we try to create different objects, right, for different role. And then a single model could be used with different permissions, like data permissions or some access control permissions, right?
Yes, yeah. So each microservice will have a different level of data permission for modification.
Makes sense. Anyone has any doubt? It's clear, right? Okay. Domain events between bounded context. For the communication between bounded context, we can use domain events. Events can be useful for integrating bounded context. Domain events are a part of domain model as they represent something that happened in the domain. That means they should also be relevant to domain experts. Okay, events can be useful for integrating bounded context, of course. Domain events are part of domain model as they represent something that happened in that domain. That means they should also be relevant to domain experts. Not sure what it means by domain expert. Yeah, maybe let's check. Okay, example: ordering a shopping cart can be modeled as such an event. This event is triggered by the bounded context order process and is received by the bounded context shipping and payment to initiate shipping and invoicing of the order.
Yeah, so here he's saying like the domain event, right? So in one domain, in the order domain, for example, order process is an event. So that event triggers the follow-up events in other microservices. So like the orchestrator or technically the orchestrator would see that, oh, this event got triggered now. Let me now, call the shipping microservice. Yeah, I mean, or once the payment is received, the payment microservice, and then after that's done, then the shipping. So that's what they are talking about here.
Okay, so I have a doubt here about this line that they are talking about irrelevant to domain expert. So will it be a case that if certain data points are permitted in ordering part, and let's say if in order process part basically, and if if the context is getting transferred to shipping or payment, and what if in shipping, let's say in terms of geospatial orders, if some part of like cart, like some items are not allowed in some country, something like that. So it could change, right? So the bounded context or the context could change with respect to shipping. So they trying to say that relevant to domain expert, that means it should change, bounded context could be changed.
Yeah. So if shipping has the logic to decide on the like payment has the logic to decide how much tax in which country, blah blah, all that, right? Like you said, geographical constraints and all that kind of logic is in payment, like the taxation and all that. And so, like once they receive that information, they'll have the necessary logic to process it.
Makes sense. So this also involves like this could be like the validation part or the validation processes. Like we have various data validation processes, right? That could also be part of this. So is it safe to say that?
Yeah. So like the order service will say that, hey, this order is received. Order means the customer clicks on buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
This order is received, and that information is passed over, for example, to payment. And then so the order will just pass in the user's credit card region and all that, and then the payment will have the logic to take all the data and then do its part. And then after that part is successfully done, then now the payment is processed. That's probably another event in the payment domain. Then then the shipping domain comes next and it will do its part. So depending on the data model they're receiving, they'll process it.
Makes sense. Anyone, any other doubts?
I have one question. Here we are talking about the domain events, right? Can the events happen in synchronous and asynchronous level also, right? Like we were talking about Kafka and all these things. So that is also kind of a domain event, right? I mean, here we are talking kind of a domain ideology like DDD. But when we look at the technical implementation, the domain events would end up in kind of in message broadcasting technique or idea, right?
Yeah. In a larger system where, like, suppose, like, take the example of Amazon where they're processing millions of orders. So each service will be receiving a lot of API calls.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and that's what we mean by the bounded context, right? It receives a lot of calls. So That's how it's managed. You have many instances. For example, just the payment microservice on many servers and many order microservices, order process microservices will be communicating independently. So yeah, that's it all depends on the company's technology, um, how much data they're managing, and they will choose what technology to use for this kind of communication.
Yeah, agreed.
Just one small question on that same topic, Deva. So is it safe to say that domain could be associated with topics? So we have different topics we are publishing or broadcasting messages, right? So is it like I was trying to understand the topic concept. We usually try to have it for pub sub only, right? But is it does it have any effect on like in design in deciding about the domain either, or is it completely unrelated?
I think it's completely, but I think it full. My understanding is it depends on. Like I've seen, like when we talk about the microservice, we go by domain level, but they are not strictly saying that microservice should be splitted by domain level. They are saying we can still go and split the microservice by technical level also, which is okay as per. So I'm thinking like in that case we can have a topic if there's a need. I mean, we can create a topic based on a domain level. For example, like, we have an order topic, which means any order events goes in, it goes to that topic. Like that, we can define. But at the same time, let's say we are splitting some kind of a business scenario or like technical reason. Let's say we are creating multiple under that domain. Let's say we are creating 2, 3 microservices because of some technical reason. Then if there's a need for each microservices to communicate, if that needs a topic, then we may define kind of more technical word. So my thought process is like, my assumption is like it could be totally depends on how they are creating the topic and for what reason. If they define it for domain level, then we can go ahead and create the topic for that particular domain. But if there's a need for a technical level, then we still can go and create the topic for a technical reason also.
Yeah, fair enough. Makes sense. Okay. Any other doubts? Okay. Bounded context and microservices. Bounded context divide a system by domains. They do not have to be microservices. They can also be implemented as modules in a deployment monolith. If the bounded contexts are implemented as microservices, this results in modules that are independent at the domain and technical level. Therefore, it is sensible to combine the concepts of microservices and bounded contexts. The dependencies of bounded context as part of strategic designs, as we'll learn in next lesson, limit this independence. However, since the microservices are part of a larger system, dependencies between the modules cannot be completely avoided. Evolution. There are a number of reasons why new bounded context and therefore new microservices might be created. Over time, new functionalities might justify new bounded context. It might become apparent that one bounded context should really be split into two. That might be the case because new logic is added to the bounded context, or the team understands the bounded context better. New microservices might be created by dividing a current one due to technical reason. Recall division of technicality. One reason may be to make scalability easier. A microservice may be split into two since the resulting microservice will be smaller and therefore easier to scale. Such reasons might also lead to larger number of microservices. Okay, I guess this is almost like all the obvious results of following the bounded context approach, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have one question. Then Then bounded context means, can we say technical grouping also? We can say a bounded context, because when we think about the DDD design, I mean DDD thought process, they say that bounded context always deals with one domain, which is like one either payment or order. But microservices, they are saying we don't need to do always like domain based, but if there is a real need of scalability, we can still go and split it up. The microservices kind of a technical split up also. So can we say a bounded context can be, it need not to be always domain based, right? It can be technical based also. We can say that logical grouping as bounded context. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And I guess one example of this could be, one use case of this could be, let's say if we have authorization kind of services, we have multiple services available, and we want to change some data permissions across multiple services. So we can change the bounded context as per the service, like, or as per the changes we require, right? So a bounded context is defined for one service, I guess, and if let's say if we want to migrate that service to something else, then I guess we can try to change the bounded context for that particular service instead of a domain that in which both of the services are working.
We shouldn't, although microservices and bounded contexts seem very similar, but we shouldn't confuse between those two. So the bounded context, what you mean by bounded context is usually the domain context, which is like the business context. Whereas microservices, when you split the functionality into multiple microservices, you can split it either for the context, or you can also split for a technical reason. So that's what they're saying here.
Yeah. Okay. So is it not about like a shared, like, let's say, okay, I guess, yeah, I got the point. Yeah. It is not, it should not be generalized. It could be a case, but the broader goal is to have a separate data domain model or something like that, for as you said, I guess, for business domain, or for making business sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess business sense, and I guess the technical part is about, let's say technical is about how we have implemented it in a way of microservices. And when we are talking about domain models or bounded context, we should only be focusing on the business part only, right?
Yeah.
Instead of caring about how it is implemented through microservice.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other doubts, anyone? Okay. Suppose you are given the following e-commerce system: customer registration, order process, data validation, freight charge calculation, payment, shipping. What will happen to the rest of modules if the internal architecture of order process is changed as follows: customer registration, order process, data validation, input sanitization, freight charge calculation, payment and shipping. Okay. So what they are trying to ask is, what will happen to the rest of the modules if the internal structure of order process is changed?
I think, can you scroll down to see what other options they give? Yeah. I think it's B, right? The rest of the modules will not have to change anything.
Rest of the models will not have to change anything. Okay. So freight charge calculation should be part of shipping, or like, will it affect shipping anyway?
No, so he's given a case A, case B. So if you like, can you just scroll a little bit above? Under order process, previously there was data validation and freight charge calculation, right? The change is they added input sanitation also before they do the freight charge. So that's the change they are doing in the order process microservice. So that's completely in the domain of order process, so that shouldn't affect the rest of the modules, is
Yeah,
what I'm guessing. So the choice should be B here.
yeah. I think order process, it is independent from our domain what we are working out, right? If we are changing the some charge calculation, that might be affects, but I too agree with B.
Yeah, I too agree with B.
Okay, okay. Awesome. Okay, so it says communication between bounded context can be triggered from domain
A,
events, changes in the network, domain-driven design.
A actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Why are domain models that span multiple bounded contexts difficult to implement?
C.
A,
Yeah, A might be also right. The domain model would be too complex.
I'm also not sure. And
I'm in between C and A.
They're saying, why is it difficult to implement? Both A and C sound reasonable. So,
I
Domain
guess
model that
new feature
span.
would be hard to implement. That might be about technical part, right? As we were discussing, it should be more about
yeah. Domain models that span multiple contexts. Yeah.
so what if let's say
C.
talking in terms of business
It might be B also, right? Like if we are implementing the multiple context implementation, the microservice would become large. We are inviting all the different contexts to add in
yeah,
our.
yeah, but
Uh,
I guess the recent discussion we were talking more about like connecting the bounded context with business context, right? And let's say if bounded, if we are trying to create a domain model which has some complex business operations or something like that, then that will make that should make the bounded like having multiple bounded contexts will make it difficult to create that domain model which could accommodate all these conditions, right?
yeah.
That
Yeah.
prime result or prime effect of that thing, but microservice would be too large or a new feature would be hard to implement. These are like slightly technical parts which could be dealt about, but if we are sorted only if we are sorted about the domain model, then we can deal with that.
Yeah. I think it should be A. I think the domain model would be too complex because you are spanning over multiple contexts.
Implementation may be complex.
Yeah, even to implement it, it will be very complicated. C is like a consequence. If you still went ahead and did
Yeah,
it, it'll be C. But I think primarily, I think it's A.
okay, let's check. Oh yeah, okay, shall we go ahead?
Yeah.
Any doubts, anyone so far? I guess we should read more about this thing or find some good video about just a definition or just how they think in terms of domain models. Like what goes in designing of the domain models.
Or else we can search for some example which is design the microservice using domain model.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe let us search and whenever we'll be coming back next time, let us try to have some case study or a short microservice design. If even if we have some video, we can discuss that.
Yeah, because these all looks like how the design patterns are there. I mean, microservice design pattern, I can say, depending on different thing.
Yeah, and in fact, I could see that in many like wherever I have worked or a couple of places where this is more towards designing whenever we are trying to write some design talk or some doing some TDD or something like that. I guess all these decisions come at that time, like, because these decisions gonna affect all the future flows, right? If the design is complex, or just like what we were seeing so far, it might be very complicated to implement it, and that might in fact extend the development hours that needs to be put into it. Yeah, shall we go ahead? Strategic design. The division of the system into different bounded contexts is part of strategic design, which belongs to the practices of domain-driven design. The strategic design describes the integration of bounded contexts. The drawing above shows the fundamental terms of strategic design. Bounded context is the context in which specific domain model is valid. The bounded context depends on each other. Usually, each bounded context is implemented by one team. The upstream team can influence the success of the downstream team. However, the downstream team cannot influence the success of upstream team. For example, the success of the team responsible for payment depends on the order process team. If data such as prices or credit card numbers are not part of the order, it is impossible to do the payment. However, the order process does not depend on the payment to be successful. Therefore, order processing is upstream. It can make payment fail. Payment is downstream since it cannot make the order process fail. Yeah, I guess this totally relates to what I was saying. So I have seen a couple of incidences where two teams are negotiating amongst themselves for design and like defining some scope or some data permissions issues related to I guess now I can relate it to domain model or something like that. So, but I guess the dependencies and this thing could affect, right?
It is like a one-way dependency.
Yeah, I guess this example talks about one-way dependency. Yes. Okay. DDD describes in several patterns how exactly communication takes place. These patterns not only describe the architecture, but also the cooperation within the organization. The customer supplier pattern. Okay. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. So what we were discussing is what they're exactly trying to say something. Almost same thing, like cooperation within the organization. The customer supplier pattern. With this customer supplier pattern, the supplier is upstream and customer is downstream. However, the customer can factor these priorities into the planning of the upstream project. Example, in the drawing below, for example, payment uses the model of the order process. However, payment defines requirements for the order process. Payment can only be done successfully if the order process provides the required data. So payment can become a customer of the order process. That way, customers' requirements can be included in the planning of the order process.
Okay.
Not sure
what is the overall picture of customer supplier pattern? I mean,
Here they're saying one microservices being a customer of the other microservice. So while designing the data model for order processing, right, you have to take inputs from payment because it depends on order processing.
Okay. Yeah,
No, I
that's why
think
the
not the payment.
contract is, sorry.
What
Yeah, the
the
contract.
payment?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's association property kind of things. Like a payment can become a customer of a order process. Customer of order process. That way, the customer requirement can be included in the planning of the order process. Okay. So we are getting the customer information through the order process is what they're trying to say, right?
No. The pattern name is customer or supplier. So that's the pattern. This is not like customer as in a person who purchases.
Yeah, it's kind of a producer consumer
Ah,
pattern. We can take it, but it's not exactly because it's not a topic idea. We can take it as a queue idea because topic like
yeah,
become like a multiple subscriber kind of idea. But here, like the order will finish its work and it will confirm with one contract. This is how I'm going to give you the payload. So that payload will flow into payment, and then payment is the receiver, or that is the customer which receives that, and then it move forward with its work. But I
exactly.
think
Yeah,
here they are trying to explain one thing which I'm not. I mean, here they are saying
I
the
feel
supplier is the upstream. Sorry.
yeah. This is the name of the pattern, right? Like the supplier is upstream, customer is downstream. So
Okay.
here payment is downstream, order processing is upstream
Okay.
yeah.
because payment is depending on order processing.
Okay.
So
So the flow is going like that from top to bottom, kind of
yeah,
upstream
yeah.
to downstream. But what is the requirements which is goes towards the order process?
Yeah, exactly like you mentioned the contract.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so payment, whatever information they want, the order processing has to take that into consideration when they're designing whatever payload they're giving to payment.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, as I guess you just mentioned, adding to that, so we try to define tier 0, tier 1, tier 2 services, right? Like even the criticality of services. So whenever it comes to SLAs, we don't like there are services which are more critical. So I guess wherever there is tier 0 service or tier 1 service, they usually don't try to include or exclude anything from the SLA because it's a critical service, because it's more important service, and the other service needs to change or needs to accommodate to the requirements according to whatever modifications are suggested. So I guess if supplier is upstream, then I think it should get more importance, right? And if customer is downstream, so whatever the SLAs are defined for by the upstream, it should be followed by the downstream team or downstream service.
Uh, I'm not sure like how the SLA would work. You mean that the service level agreement, right?
Yeah. So basically, the kind of claims or the kind of designs we are giving, like that's how both of them will be interacting with each other, right? So the payload part that like earlier we were discussing, that should be
Yeah.
part of what we will be providing, or how we'll be servicing the request, right?
Yes, that's correct. How the payload is going to look like and how the endpoint is going to look like. That's where, practically what we do, let's say order process is handled by a different Scrum team or payment is handled by a different Scrum team. So what we do before doing all those real work, we kind of sit together and then write a contract, this is what we need and this is what you need to provide and all those things. So that's what I think we need to have that pattern in picture proactively as part of the design before doing any coding or any mocking. Like right now, we do some kind of a mocking or API virtualization. So in a way that before writing code, we visualize everything and then we go with the coding after that.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess it might be more specific to our side. Like in our case, we have this clear cut definition. Like this is an upstream service. This is a downstream service, or maybe this is tier 0, tier 1, tier 2. Like this kind of classifications. So whenever any conflict comes in, whenever anything comes in, so tier 0, there are like there should be there should be very rare cases when there any changes to needs to be made into tier 0 service, and all the changes are tried to be pushed into tier 2 service or something like that.
Okay,
So,
okay, I get it. So they grouped the services into a multiple tiers, like whether it is a less sensitive or more sensitive, something like that.
yes, yes. So that's why they are saying here, right? Like somewhere they mentioned that yeah. So here you can say you can see payment can become a customer of order process. That way, customers' requirement can be included in the planning of order process, right?
Yeah.
So if there are any things needed, any particular things are needed to be agreed upon, then they try to push it to one particular service based on the distinction they are trying to make.
I think the way they are saying customer supplier in like how the customer suppliers works, that pattern they are trying to write. I mean, based on the supplier.
Yes, yes, yes. So supplier is the one who will be accommodating the request made by the customer service.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. The whole idea is both of them should know each other. I mean, they have to plan really well before doing any activities. Like, if both the team works on silos and then they come for integration, they may get into a lot of issues. That's what I think they are saying, that, the supplier should understand the customer and the customer should understand the supplier. This is how the contract, otherwise it will end up in reworking, or all those issues will come later, especially when microservices kind of, each microservice is handled by different team like that.
Makes sense. Okay. Any doubts or shall we move ahead?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. The conformist pattern. Conformist means that a bounded context simply uses a domain model for another bounded context. Example, in the drawing below, the bounded context, statistics, and order process both use the same domain model. The statistics are part of data warehouse. They use the domain model of the order process bounded context and extract some information relevant to the store in the data warehouse. However, with the conformist pattern, the data warehouse team does not have a say in case of changes to the bounded context. The data warehouse team could not demand additional information from the other bounded context. However, it is still possible that they would not receive additional information out of altruism.
Yeah, here they're saying they will receive additional information.
Yeah, yeah.
But they will just discard it, even though they don't need it.
Makes sense. Essentially, the data warehouse team is not deemed important enough to get more powerful role. Okay, I guess this is slightly self-explanatory, right? Any doubts so far? Okay. Anti-corruption layer. In the case of anti-corruption layer pattern, the bounded context does not directly use the domain model of the other bounded context, but it contains a layer of decoupling its own domain model from the model of the bounded context. This is useful in conjunction with the conformist pattern to generate a separate model decoupled from the other model. Example, the drawing below shows, okay, so this is useful in conjunction with conformist pattern to generate a separate model decoupled from the other model. The drawing below shows that the bounded context shipping uses an anti-corruption layer at the interface to the bounded context legacy so that both bounded contexts have their own independent domain models. This ensures that the model in the legacy system does not affect the bounded context shipping. Shipping can implement a clean model in its bounded context.
Maybe it is related to, like, for example, just I'm thinking of the example here, address checking or something, or like a, you can say some reconfirmation kind of thing, validation kind of things. Are we using anti-corruption there?
So how can we include the decoupling part there, like decoupling of its own domain model? So you mean to say, like while we are performing some validations or something like that, we will have our subset of bounded context or something like that, like two different bounded contexts.
Yeah, I'm thinking the payment is the one and order is the one, but if you are like adding the information, we will reconfirm, right, whether it's a valid information or not.
Okay.
I'm just thinking of that example, is they are using anti-corruption layer, because which is
Okay.
not related to like a payment, but the result of that anti-corruption related to payment kind of thing.
Makes sense. So I guess one important point I could see here is it says the bounded context shipping uses an anti-corruption layer at the interface to the bounded context legacy, so that both bounded contexts have their own independent domain model. So they have just added an extra layer. As you said, if we have to perform validations, then maybe there should be an extra layer in where we can do so, right? Because wherever the interface is coming in, we might want to use the data that is being sent by this, but that should be in context of this either. So that's where the interface comes in, which might bring it on the same level. Is it something like that?
Yeah, I think for, because we are connecting to, for example, like PayPal, any other different services we are connecting, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is like connecting service or the checking the service related information is independent of domain payment.
Yeah, so our own business logic of a service should differ, like, right? All the other thing should be totally different than what we are processing here. That's what I understood it. Like I understood it this way.
The, sorry, the microservice wise maybe it is different, but like mm, that's what, like payment is independent of this anti-corruption layer, what I'm thinking, if we are thinking on the base of order and payment. For example, like if we are booking the ticket, right, uh, the third part, the payment will happen in very different way than the booking tickets.
Uh-huh.
But before booking tickets, it will check the bank account kind of thing. But booking ticket is independent of that service. I'm thinking that context, but it may be right or wrong, I don't know.
Okay, maybe shall we check this about if there is any related info about this part?
You can say examples, right? Anti-corruption model example.
Yeah.
Hi everyone.
Design an anti-corruption layer event-driven microservice.
I guess maybe let's check this one and then maybe the other one. Okay.
I think this corruption layer is better.
Yeah.
In the previous sections,
This one,
I
is it
described
this
how
one, right?
you can implement new functions.
Okay, yeah, let's go through all of them. I guess just 4 or 5 minutes videos.
Functionality is standalone microservices, and you can extract modules out of your monolith and turn them into standalone services. And in both cases, you need some glue code, which is also known as an anti-corruption layer, to integrate those services back in with the monolith, because usually the data needs to be shared between the services and the monolith. So in this section, I'm going to talk more about the design of the anti-corruption layer. So it's a fancy term for glue code, and it first appeared in the book Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans, which I've sort of mentioned is really a must-read book that's very applicable to designing microservices. So the idea first appeared there, and then it was refined in a paper that he wrote, and the link to that is on this slide. And the reason it's called anti-corruption layer is because you can think of your service code as being pristine. It has a clean model, it's written using new technology, and you want to prevent legacy concepts from polluting your nice, pristine service. You want to prevent legacy concepts from corrupting the domain model of your service, hence the term corruption layer. Abstractly, the corruption layer looks like this. So on the left, we've got the service, and on the right, we've got the monolith. And then the corruption layer sits between the two. The anti-corruption layer has an API, and that's expressed in terms of the domain language of the service. So it's a pristine API into the corruption layer. And then on the other end of the anti-corruption layer is a facade, which basically wraps monolithic application functionality, and it's written in terms of the language of the monolith, so the legacy domain model concepts. And then between the two is an adapter that implements the API of the corruption layer, and then uses a translator component to translate between the two different domain models. So there's like two APIs, and then between them is a translation layer that translates from service domain model concepts into monolithic domain model concepts, and vice versa. And in some cases, the anti-corruption layer is this bidirectional layer. So one interesting issue that many people ask is, where does the anti-corruption layer reside? And another way of expressing that is, where is the remoting boundary between the service and the anti-corruption layer and the monolith? There's a few different options. One strategy is to have the anti-corruption layer as a module inside the service, and then the facade makes remote calls into the monolith. So that's one strategy. And you could think of using this when your monolith is code that you can just not change in any way, where even though you're undergoing a refactoring effort, all of the work for refactoring has to be done outside of the monolith. The other strategy is to actually put the facade inside the monolith. So we can actually, if that's code that we own, we can actually implement a facade inside the monolith to help with the refactoring effort and the implementation of these anti-corruption layers. And in this case, the adapter is making a remote call into the facade that exists inside the monolith. And then the final option is to actually put the entire anti-corruption layer inside the monolith. And so there's trade-offs. Part of it is like, how much code do you want to make? How much in the way of code changes do you want to make into the monolith? And it's like either none or more. And there's various options along that spectrum. So that's the anti-corruption layer. It's some glue code that integrates the service into the monolith so that they can share data.
Yeah, I guess still have the same understanding.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, okay, maybe let's check this one. And so shall we go on or stop? I guess it's already 8:30. Maybe let's go through this video and stop afterwards.
Yeah, we can continue tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. I guess not sure if it is okay to spend time on this or something like that, because this looks a slightly subtle concept or something like that, until I feel that if we are not able to relate it to some use cases, it
What
might be
I felt is that whatever example you showed from that, what I felt is like if the we are using the old system is still running and we are adopting new system, in between that time period we are adding the one adapter to switch between the
Service
two is
domain
what I
model
felt.
concepts.
This adapter, they're creating one more layer, uh, based on the requirement it will call the service.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of adapter they given, right? From that I thought like the adapter is one which will switch between the.
Yeah. So even in design patterns, like in Java design patterns, like the Gang of Four ones, we tend to have adapter or facet pattern wherever we don't want to change the data models of either of the classes. Let's say if we have one class and we have other class and we are trying to inject some dependency and stuff. And if you don't want to change the data model of this or data model of this either, then there comes a facet pattern or a adapter pattern, right?
Yeah, adapter is comes in a different way, right? Like it is a one more, yeah, I can say, yeah, similar. Yeah, it's one more, I mean it is kind of a, I'm not getting words to say that.
Yeah, so adapter pattern is like if we have a certain certain type of pojos or certain pojo model for like for this service, and if this service is trying to pass on parameters in some different model, then we try to design like a middle layer, like an adapter, right, for this, which will make it compatible with this particular data that the monolith might be trying to pass.
Yeah, I think we will study or we'll explore more on this. Let's see.
Yeah, maybe let's spend some time and see if this is useful or not, and if we are able to relate to it. Then otherwise, maybe I feel not sure if we should just quickly go through it or spend some time in understanding this or not.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe let's go through this video for now and stop.
you can put that one in the link also.
What is anti-corruption?
The earlier video.
This one. This looks different.
It's just 4 minutes, no? Maybe we can quickly
Yeah.
finish off. I'm fine either way.
Okay, okay, yeah, let's go through it quickly. Yeah.
Hello friends, my name is Vikas Kene. I have more than 20 years of experience in IT industry. I am TOGAF certified. What is anti-corruption layer? What is anti-corruption layer? As we use anti-corruption layer when subsystem A need to talk to subsystem B. It acts as a facade or gateway between two systems. So it is taking requests from one system, passing to another system, and translating the return structure to the subsystem A. Generally, we use this kind of pattern, and as we can see, subsystem has new architecture, which is using microservice style of architecture pattern. So it may be talking to a legacy system. Legacy system may have APIs or some technology. You don't want your new architecture to be corrupted, to be polluted, or make it look bad by other structure. The old structure may have certain way of coding convention. Do you remember Hungarian coding convention? or they may have function which is writing 20 parameters, or they may be using data set, and if you come from .NET technology, your new microservices may be domain-driven, highly object-oriented, object-oriented technology. Anti-corruption layer, not only you can use only in this kind of system where you're building a new architecture and you have legacy system, and you may be migrating legacy system somewhere to the new architecture. And this anti-corruption layer could be the interface which will protect you from that subsystem B history, the future changes. In this, I have seen anti-corruption layer being used not only between systems. You can use it within solution. If you inherit a solution which has a lot of non-object oriented code, and you want to have a nice, you want to create a new architecture, you can use anti-corruption layer to create wrappers, facade over the old system, so that you can start making new beginning. So anti-corruption layer helps.
I think he's repeating same thing, Sagar.
Yeah, I guess.
But one way it is good we read this one, because there is a possibility of asking question. There is a old code is there. We want to adopt that kind of things.
Yeah. Yes. And I guess through that, I guess I just realized one like there are like
your voice gone, Sagar. Like
okay.
some mic issue.
Yeah. Maybe let's wait for now and come back later.
No, not able to hear you properly.
Am I audible, Vani?
Yeah, now fine.
Okay. So I guess I could find one. I can relate to this pattern at one use case. Wherever, let's say, if you have multiple endpoints, multiple APIs trying to make changes, and these are interacting with one single system, let's say, which might have some different data model, and each of these endpoints might have some different data model. They are trying to change some values which are critical and might be affecting to this either. So during that scenario, there could be a shared context or a shared layer or a shared data model that could be created. So whatever changes or whatever values that these microservices or the endpoints are producing, they will be storing or putting or setting those values in the objects of this particular context, or whatever objects we define, we will define it here. So just like the facade pattern, like facade design pattern, everything will be designed, everything will be instantiated here, and whatever values these are producing, they will be reset or set to into these objects only, so that whenever these microservices or this legacy service might want to access some parameters, it doesn't have to deal with each parameter separately, but it will just read it from this context. So centralized place where all the data points could be set, and then this layer can control the access for this, or this layer can also control the access for each of the services.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, or not sure if
No, it makes sense. Like that's what like.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I will try to read or learn more about that thing, and maybe we can come back to the.
Yeah, I think whatever pattern we are reading, it's better to search some examples, like real-time examples, or like which are given the examples in the YouTube, something like that. So it will be more clear what we are reading.
Sure. Yeah, let's spend some time, and maybe I find now I feel like this could be an interesting and important stuff either. Not sure if this is totally related to system design or not, but I guess at least in the
If they go deep dive into microservice, surely it is.
Yes, yes. At least in development or in work scenarios or in teams, this is definitely is important. I feel.
You can be architect.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sagar. We'll continue.
Yeah. Yeah, just a quick question. So tomorrow are we doing system design or are we doing lead code?
Lead code.
I guess from tomorrow onwards we can start with lead code.
Okay. So system design is on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 days system design and okay, 3 days.
No,
lead code.
Saturday we did lead code, right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Oh, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is system design. Okay. And Friday is we don't have a session anyway, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So
Okay.
what are we doing tomorrow?
Yeah.
I'll
So
see if I can find time to look at them.
sure. So I guess like all the problems in the sheet, like the lead code problem sheet, whichever would be there in serialized like serial. So we should be starting with permutations. So we covered subset 2 in last session.
Okay.
So now I think we can directly start with permutations.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you all.